Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. We're very excited for this webinar, and we'll get started in just a few moments. We'll give folks a few minutes to join. If you'd like to pop in the chat where you're joining from, that would be fun.
And I'm also launching a little poll, Kaila, that they should be seeing.
Fantastic. Yes, thank you, Sarah. So while we're waiting for folks to join, if you want to go ahead and take the poll, that would be wonderful. There's just 3 questions, very relevant to what we'll be talking about today.
And the meeting will be recorded. We'll probably be sending the recording later today or tomorrow at the latest. So if you miss anything or want to catch up, you will receive the whole recording afterwards.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sarah. While we're waiting for folks, just a couple housekeeping. So this webinar is going to the top of the hour. So it's an hour long. We'll be doing introductions, then we're going to have some pointed discussions around well-being and resilience with our panelists. And then at the end, we will be having a question and answer session. This is the 7th webinar in our series of player engagement. And the last one we did, we ran out of time because we had so many fantastic questions. So please go ahead. You can pop them in the Q&A. Sarah will be monitoring, or you can pop them in the chat as well. And if we don't have time to get to them, then we will absolutely be answering them online as well. And I have heard rumor that perhaps a couple of our panelists might be able to stay past the top of the hour if we do have a lot of questions. So I think I see a good number of participants, and it's just a couple minutes past the hour. So Sarah, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Again, for those that have just joined, there is a poll. Please go ahead and participate and let us know your answers. But we're very excited to get going. So as I mentioned, we've been doing a series of webinars around player engagement, and this particular webinar is very near and dear to my heart. When I joined Keyword Studios last year, I was extremely excited to work alongside a friend and former colleague, Sharon Fisher, who was instrumental in creating the Wellbeing and Resilience program for our superhero moderators here at Keywords. And so that program really brought to light the necessity of taking care of your people. It's a really challenging role. Folks are exposed to a lot of difficult content. They have to make very hard decisions about content that can be kept up or taken down. And particularly in the last couple of years, the role of the moderator has changed a lot as well. And just for those joining, I'm sure everybody knows, but just in case, when we talk about a moderator, we're talking about an individual that is reviewing content in games, online platforms, social spaces, anywhere that people are able to share UGC, user-generated content, whether that's text or image or videos, a variety of different types of content. And they're tasked with the job of reviewing that content and taking the decision, should it be allowed on a platform or should it not, based on that individual company's stance and policies. As technology has advanced over the years and AI has improved tremendously, a lot of folks, I hear rumblings saying that maybe we don't need humans anymore. And I know everybody on this call, and hopefully all of those listening, don't share that sentiment. We know that humans are needed. They need to be in the loop, but their role is changing. Perhaps they need to look at the more nuanced content. Perhaps they need to look at the more difficult content around real life threats and what that can mean. And they have to make a lot of very difficult decisions, as we said. And so that was the impetus for this webinar and why I'm so excited to have the folks joining us today. We're talking about resilience and well-being and what we can do to support our moderators, but we're also going to dive into some key takeaways that folks can implement in their everyday working life as well, and maybe even some of your personal life, we'll see. So to kick us off, I would love each and every fabulous panelist to please introduce themselves. I will start with myself. My name is Kaila Jarvis. I am our Global Trust and Safety Advisor at Keyword Studios. So I work very closely with our clients and companies to understand what their goals are when it comes to online safety, trust and safety, and then work with them to develop a strategy to achieve those goals. So it's a very rewarding job. I love it, and I'm very excited to share whatever expertise I can today. Alice, would you like to start and kick us off with an introduction, a little bit about yourself, maybe quickly why you got into the role and something that you're proud of?
Sure. I'm Alice Hunsberger. She, her pronouns. Nice to see everybody. Hello. I am currently head of trust and safety at a company called Musubi. It's a startup using AI for moderation, trust and safety, but always keeping human in the loop and making sure we design systems that keep humans in the loop as part of that. I've been working in trust and safety for over 15 years, started as a frontline content moderator, managed frontline teams, both on dating apps when I was head of trust and safety there, and then also for an outsourcing company. So I have a lot of experience managing frontline folks and thinking about wellness as a manager, as well as more holistically. And then I also write a newsletter called Everything, as part of Everything in Moderation, called Trust and Safety Insider, which I wrote about the study here and have a lot of thoughts and feelings too. So really, really excited to be with actual experts in wellness here. And I've learned a lot from the folks here, and hopefully we'll be able to share some things with you guys as well.
Thanks, Alice. Jeffrey, would you like to go next?
Sure. Thanks, Kaila. And Alice, we're very, very pleased that you were able to find the study, read it, and wax lyrical about it. So looking forward to the conversation. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, folks. I'm Jeffrey Demarco. I come from 20 years of experience in the wider online safety digital resilience space. I intersect academia, where I'm an associate director with the Center for Abuse and Trauma Studies at Middlesex University in London, which is where a lot of the insight and evidence and work that my team and I have been doing in commercial content moderator wellbeing has emerged from over the last 5 years. And I also work as the senior technical advisor for protecting children from digital harm for Save the Children. And despite it saying simply children in there, it is more widely about how do we safeguard and capacity build across that wider ecosystem of online safety. We want to make sure that those frontline practitioners, that is those people reviewing that content, are also being taken care of and are fed back to in terms of their crucial and impactful position in that wider chain of events. So really looking forward to speaking with you all over the next hour.
Thank you, Jeffrey. And Sabine.
Thanks, Kaila. Very, very excited to be here with you, Alice and Jeffrey, to talk about the well-being, and that is my responsibility here at Keywords. So I've been in the trust and safety industry for close to 10 years. My career started at a company that builds a moderation tool. So I got that insight, understanding the work of the moderators, the risk to that type of work. And then when I joined Keywords, my role and responsibility was to create and develop a well-being program, making sure that we support our superheroes. This is how we refer to them here at Keywords, in their day-to-day work, really understanding their needs and supporting them in their day-to-day work.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sabine. And just before we move on, quick note for those folks viewing, you do have the ability to adjust your gallery if you want to see everybody at once, or if you want to see just the speaker, you can go ahead and toggle that in your view section. So you heard us mention a report. Alice read it and provided takeaways from that report, which is the impetus for this webinar. And Jeffrey and Sabine were instrumental in conducting the research that we were talking about. So maybe Sabine, maybe you could share with us just sort of an overview and an understanding of why we wanted to conduct this research and the relevance sort of behind it.
Sure. So back in February 2024, a dear coworker, hi Leah, just in case you're watching, it's great to have you here, actually made me aware of the research. And after reading about it in the TSPA newsletter, I reached out to Ruth, one of the researchers alongside Jeffrey. And so we introduced each other, started talking, and yes, we decided to partner. In July, we conducted the research. And I'll let Jeffrey speak into the why from their perspective. But for us at Keywords, it was first and foremost to validate the internal well-being initiatives that we created, and also to identify gaps of the program, because I was there was no doubt for me that we have blind spots. We had created the program, it's internal, so we wanted that those external eyes to have a look at our program and show us or identify those gaps and those blind spots. And then more on the broader side, it was to educate and lead wider industry on the benefits of a well-being program for content moderators. And last but not least, encourage cross-industry consistency and implementation, and also encourage research in that area, further research, further studies to understand our superheroes better.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sabine. And as Jeffrey, as Sabine said, perhaps you could share a little bit about the work and what you hope to learn from this research that you conducted.
Of course. Of course, Kaila. And just to see, I see that Leah is in the audience. So nice to have you here, Leah. And thank you for everything you've done. And just for context, everyone, Sabine referred to my dear colleague and collaborator, Dr. Ruth Spence. She works at the Center for Abuse and Trauma Studies with me. She can't be here tonight. She's probably quite keen that I'm the one doing the speaking as opposed to her, but I could not, and we could not have done anything in terms of these public outputs, these collaborations without her. She's been fantastic, and I look forward to continuing working with her. But quite importantly, the origins of our collaboration and partnership with Sabine and our colleagues at Keywords started about 5 years ago when Ruth and I were having conversations around what was missing in the research ecosystem for online safety for children. Now, a lot of the work, as many of you will be aware, is about exposure to content, in particular, exposure to CSAM. There's been some research with children and survivors and victims, not as much as people tend to think, and the impact that, traumagenic content has on them. And there's been research with other quote unquote first responders, in particular, those working within the police who are regularly exposed to child sexual abuse material. And Ruth and I thought about, the importance of thinking what other key players are instrumental in the pathway to ensuring that young people, all users, are kept safe. And we started discussing the role of content moderators. It's, we have to recognize they do important, emotionally demanding work, a subset struggle. Many do very well, and we wanted to understand what predicts which path you end up on. So we did some work funded by Safe Online and the Tech Coalition that was exploring wider content moderator experiences and looking at what we could offer in terms of well-being resource. We then started developing a resource which will soon be implemented. And as Sabine mentioned, we started talking once they became aware of the work. And we wanted to look specifically at their program and see if we could replicate some of the findings we'd seen in the wider ecosystem with content moderators, but specifically in that kind of controlled environment within Keywords, pardon me. And I guess there's three primary questions from with my academic and chartered psychology hat on. It's essentially how common is meaningful distress versus healthy functioning among moderators, and that's key, right? Because meaningful distress immediately nuances the fact that distress is an individual experience. And I think we're going to talk a lot about that and about individual resilience, because, as I'm sure many of you appreciate, it's really not a one-size-fits-all. And that's the importance of understanding a variety of different well-being resources. We also wanted to understand which coping styles align with better outcomes, in particular, higher levels of mental well-being, lower levels of psychological distress, and then obviously which program features might help, or quite importantly, especially for leadership and management, undermine well-being. And this kind of, you'll get a bit of insight as we go along today, but those kind of are the three core areas: is what are we doing right? What could we do better? What gaps do we want to, what plug? And actually, it's fine to have a gap. That's the importance of having these conversations.
Absolutely. And thank you for that very thoughtful response. And for our attendees and afterwards, we will include a link to that research as well and to the paper that was created. And then Alice, again, you're sort of the reason that we were all here together today. You had a LinkedIn post that you had created that talked about your sort of impressions of the report. Would you like to just give us a brief overview of your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I'm going to be super brief because I think getting into some of the more tactical answers and details later will be more helpful. But essentially two things. Sabine, I love that you said that, part of the goal here is to share industry cross knowledge. And I think it's really important to have benchmarks, evidence, real information, real research that people at platforms or places where you have moderators are actually like understanding, what does wellness mean? What does good look like? How do we actually implement it? How do we actually support people? I know there's a lot of places that are trying to reinvent the wheel a little bit, and it's really amazing to have some pretty precise and really, really useful insights that anybody can use. So that was like my biggest takeaway, is just like, thank goodness we've got more research, we've got more public information out there based on actual moderators. The other thing that I think was a really big takeaway was just how wellness for moderation teams can't be set it and forget it. It's not one size fits all. You can't just have one program that works well for everybody. And once you've checked these 3 boxes, hurrah, your wellness woes are solved forever. It's much more complicated than that. And it's really this push and pull and this balance between individual resilience and what's going on holistically in somebody's life, as well as what are the supports that they have at work, and then what are they exposed to and what their work conditions are like more generally. So it's not always about exposure. Sometimes it's also about structures that exist around somebody's work life that can be equally stressful and difficult, and people have different ways of dealing with that. So yeah, those were some of the takeaways, but I think we should get into some of the details and actionable advice for folks as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a perfect segue, Alice. So thank you for that. Even if we didn't plan it, I love when it works out that way. So we're sort of going to talk in 3 sections. And so the first section is, and I think through the practice that Keywords put in around well-being and resilience, and then through the research, it definitely enforced our thoughts around the fact that some people are made to be moderators, meaning that some people have the ability to have a balanced perspective. They're more resilient to the type of content and to the impact that their work can have on them. And so what we realized is that we needed to take it all the way back to the hiring process. And in part, that's what Sabine created as our Wellbeing and Resilience Program Director. So Sabine, I'm going to start with a question for you, which is that the research showed that more than half, so about 57% of the moderators that were in the report fall into the healthy to low distress range. Can you tell us what that means? And also share with us how you identified sort of those behavioral indicators that let you know that you're hiring the right person for the job. And this is very relevant for folks that are, according to our polls, we're pretty split on, do you have a program? Do you not? Are you looking to implement one? This is a really important first step that you can implement straight away. So sorry, Sabine, I took away your question there, but if you could just share with us how you can identify these folks.
Yeah. So talking about the number, Kaila, first and foremost, or in a very abstract way, it's a number. It's an indicator, a pulse check of the overall well-being of our team. That's what I first see, and something that we were looking for, right? I talked about the validation, the gap identification. Secondly, and that's the crucial point, it is a starting point for further interpretation, for further questions, taking into account the different components that contribute to well-being. Alice mentioned that, or touched base on that in her introduction. Because I've learned throughout the years that the factors contributing to stress, they cannot be limited to the content alone or to the typical content moderator challenges. There is way more. Just to give you an example, I will work with a lot of examples because I talk a lot with superheroes, right? Sometimes it's back pain because of the work environment, or they need a stand-up desk. They sit a lot, right? And that can be an additional burden to the overall challenges that content moderators have. External factors, internal factors. And once you have answered those questions, and you can answer them by asking superheroes, doing more surveys, doing more research in that area, and you understand those different variables, you can then further tailor and adjust your support and your program, because we all know what Jeffrey mentioned before, one size fits all just doesn't work. And now to your second part of the questions, like those behavioral indicators, unrelated to, so first of all, unrelated actually to the Wellbeing Program, what that number also says, that there is the aspect of being a natural. So basically, some people are made to be moderators. For some, so that number also indicates maybe some people, they really thrive in that job. For some, they identify after a while, this isn't for me, no matter the support program, or no matter the importance of the work that I do, this just isn't for me. But then in terms of behavioral indicators, what we are looking for, and that starts with the hiring process, but it continues also during onboarding and during the journey of a moderator, are dealing with stress, the levels of emotional intelligence, resilience, also the awareness, that is something important, of the power, the authority also a superhero has when it actually comes to user actions, to consequences, right? It's crucial that they remain aware also of this responsibility and use that authority fairly. Understand also that moderation work is a collaborative work that doesn't happen separately in a room, but you are actually part of a global team, and you understand yourself as part of that global team. And last but not least, also the intention of becoming a content moderator. So these are all factors we communicate, we look for during hiring, onboarding, and the journey of a well-being moderator, the journey, yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that ties in really well to what Alice and Jeffrey have already said, which is it's not a set it and forget it. So it's also, you don't just hire a person and you look for these indicators and then you send them on their way. You need to continue to check in and to provide resources and adjust those resources as well. And I think, Alice, you talked about the impossible task of a perfect well-being program because people, as we know, react differently. Some content is harder than others to review for different reasons. And also cultural differences can play a crucial role in global teams and also the folks of the content that we're moderating for as well. So have you noticed sort of a correlation between certain cultural backgrounds or life experiences that can build better resilience outcomes? And if so, how do you adapt your screening and well-being process accordingly?
Yeah, I think, again, this is so wildly individual, and you can't make stereotypical cultural statements because every person is going to be completely different, even within countries, just based on your family's personal culture. People can be very different. But, I'll say that it's one of the most important things for good outcomes for moderation teams is to have a feeling of psychological safety within the team, that somebody feels like they can go to their team lead, they can go to their manager, they can say, hey, I'm having a really hard time right now. What can we do to try to help me? If they're not able to be open and honest about struggling with mental health issues, then that's a non-starter. So that building that safety is really, really important. And there are many places around the world where having those frank and open conversations about your mental health is still very taboo. And so it's really critical in those situations to spend even more time than you might think necessary talking about it openly at your workplace and building perhaps a different workplace culture than the culture that people experience outside of work. That has to start from the top. So that has to be VP level in charge of trust and safety is talking about their own mental health with the frontline moderators. It means the manager is talking about their own mental health with the frontline team. The team leads are checking in on people and asking how they are. You're doing pulse checks regularly. Like all of these things are just build the vocabulary and the comfort level to get past that feeling that it's not okay to share how you're doing. I think the other flip side of it is people rely on these jobs for their livelihoods. And I think a lot of the time, some people can be scared to admit that they're struggling and having a hard time because they worry that that's going to impact their ability to work. And they don't want to lose their job, so they don't want to admit that they're having a hard time because they need to work. And that's like another cultural issue that can come up. And so another way of sort of normalizing these conversations and allowing people to be open is have alternate career pathways, potentially have cross-training opportunities if you also have player support that's maybe less content moderation related and more customer support related, have ways that people can get that training and move from one to the other. I'll also say, to go back to, what you were saying about resilience and just naturally some people being good at moderation. I've met a lot of people who get so stressed out doing phone support for customer support. They hate talking to people on the phone, and they find content moderation way less stressful and way better for their mental health because it's like a back office role. And so you might have cross-pollination going in both directions. And it really, again, comes down to the theme of today, I think, which is every individual is going to be different, and you need to have a flexible enough system that people are heard and responded to based on those individual needs and preferences.
I really love all of that, Alice, and something that stuck out for me and perhaps a takeaway for our attendees is that top-down approach. So not putting the onus on the moderator to say, hey, I'm not okay, but having that top-down approach and demonstrating that that behavior is acceptable, to say and do it by demonstration, which is, these are things that I'm struggling with. Has anyone else experienced this? And that builds that culture that it's okay to talk about this. And I think that's a really important aspect of it all. Absolutely. Jeffrey, over to you. So in the research, you found that the use of well-being services wasn't significantly associated with reduced psychological distress, suggesting, as we've discussed, that natural resilience plays a role. And I thought that was a really interesting observation, and it was a bit of a mind adjustment for me. I'm like, wait, I don't quite understand. So perhaps you can sort of share with us your findings in a little more detail, and then share with our folks how organizations can weigh this against the importance of actually providing a well-being program.
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. And I mean, at first, to be, complete transparency, we were scared to feed this back to the colleagues at Keywords because we thought that that would not necessarily be well received. But actually, as my colleague and I delved deeper and engaged in the conversation, there's some positive in there, and that positive is something, again, around the theme that's come out from both what Sabine and Alice have said, is it's different strokes for different folks. And every single person is going to have an individualized trauma experience, both informally, and by informally, I mean outside of the workplace, and formally, by meaning in the workplace, especially when it comes to dealing with traumagenic content like that, which moderators are regularly exposed to. And it came down to, whilst they're not necessarily being, significant, a non-statistical relationship around its use in improving well-being, it doesn't mean that those people had low levels of well-being. And the data suggests that, the presence of said services and a suite of measures, again, combating that tick box exercise of one size fits all, is extremely useful because they know the company cares. They know they can speak about things, and we do not want to kind of put take away anything from their own informal support networks. They might feed, their resilience may be fed outside of the workplace, right? It might not be with colleagues. If it is, that's great. Sabine and Alice have made fantastic points around that global community of trust and safety, and knowing that there's others that experience similar things to you, that have the same challenges. That sense of community is so important for that trust and safety identity. But that recognition, again, and I'm going to sound like a broken record by the time we hit the top of the hour, of individual experiences. I've spoken to lots of moderators in a range of roles and organizations who all have different triggers for the different harmful content they view. Some of them, it's quite easy to kind of, depersonalize and disassociate from quite visceral, extreme content because that's so clearly violative and illegal to them. Where the others, it's the gray boundaries or the more nuanced content, like that suggests manipulation or suggests doxing, something that isn't necessarily, you can tell there's a bad actor behind that trying to do something. And that kind of, lack of respect and confidence in humanity for knowing what that bad actor is up to has more of an effect. But a really interesting and important point all to take away from that is, it needs to be, I suppose, a fit between the job's demands, right? So what is the job asking from you as an individual in the organization versus what the individual's capacity is? And Alice made the point just a few moments ago around those kind of customer support operators. And with Keywords, that was additionally a fantastic insight, was that those that had transitioned from customer support roles into the superhero roles actually had significantly higher levels of well-being. And when thinking about what that means for the role and the skills available by the individual, we think that it might be around skill repertoires that generalize. So having already had that ability to kind of do rapid triage, engage in on the trot structured problem solving, but also boundary setting because of the high volume support work that they may have been doing. But equally, it's about agency in the workflow. And I can't stress that enough from our early work and that which we did with Keywords. It's those feedback loops. It's telling these individuals about what the resolution of the work they're doing is. Just a little bit of feedback from law enforcement or from the company. And that's a management decision and a management task. It's making sure that that loop is being closed, there's clarity around decisions, and that quick learning can be implemented so that those policy challenges in different contexts, cultures, whatnot, at least it's being spoken about. I suppose the last bit to your point, Kaila, in terms of, well, but they're not using the well-being programs. It's around what management is modeling. So again, what my colleagues have already said. And it's okay for management not to have all the solutions. That's extremely, extremely important to recognize as well. But it's about the visibility and transparency of that communication, knowing that you can go to a manager after seeing something, that's pretty challenging, and your manager going, holy crap, I don't know what to do about that, but actually I'm with you. So let's think about this together. It's that collaboration and openness, so vitally important.
Yeah, absolutely love that. And you sort of, again, provided a wonderful segue into the second section, which is, and you touched on it, around coping and sort of this problem-focused coping, from personal experience in my roles and also industry exposure and various varying research that we have on the topics. We know that, and I'm speaking right now about video games, the industry I'm in, but video game moderators and moderators in general leverage various coping strategies to manage their exposure to this distressing content. So we're sort of segueing into our next section. I do just want to give my fellow panelists a time check. So it's at 9:35 my time, so 35 wherever you are. And we have these two topics to get through and then Q&A. So perhaps we can just be a little quicker on our answers. I have to ask. So Jeffrey, I'm going to start with you on this one. Can you share with us what is problem-focused coping? And do we have evidence that some strategies are more effective or efficient than others? You're muted.
Does that buy into my time? So in really plain terms, problem-focused coping is what problem-focused coping does is change the work so tomorrow is easier than today, right? So it tries to shrink uncertainty, help individuals build their own self-efficacy, and it reduces re-exposure, not to content necessarily, but re-exposure to the problems that lead to the lack of being able to cope with the content. So in our data set that we engaged with, we found that greater use of problem-focused coping aligned with better well-being, whereas using avoidance or purely emotional coping didn't necessarily help with positive, mental well-being or help decrease psychological distress. So something I use with wider psychological safety and psychological first aid training when thinking about an organization applying problem-focused coping is to think of the acronym TAME, T-A-M-E, as a micro method. It's around targeting a friction. It's around adjusting just a single lever to deal with that friction. It's around measuring a single outcome from that tweak. There's your M. And then it's about the E, embedding that win in the workflow, right? What that does is give the staff agency and empowerment over the challenges the individual is coping with, but it also gives usable, implementable policy in the panel type outputs for middle management, senior management, and above.
Fantastic. Really love that. Took notes on TAME. Great acronym, and folks can take that away with them as well. So Alice, in the, I say rigid structure of moderation work because there are tasks that you have to do and accomplish and get through and all of that. What are the most impactful ways you've found to give moderators control over their environment and decision-making process to perhaps help reduce that stress and inform their coping mechanisms?
Lots of things you can try. Every team is going to be different. Every queue and workflow is going to be different. So I'll caveat with that, but I will blast through a number of things that I've done with success with my teams in the past. The number one thing, this goes back to what Jeffrey was saying, allow people to escalate with no questions asked. Take it to your manager. If your manager says, I actually don't know what to do with this, the manager takes that up a level. And so, you know, eventually, if it's a really, really tricky issue, the legal department will have an answer, because that is what lawyers are paid to do. So there's always somebody that you can escalate up to, and you need to allow those escalation paths. And even if it's not a difficult decision necessarily, if it's something where a team member is just like, this is just like one thing too many on my list today that I cannot handle, don't punish people for passing it on to somebody else. It needs, you know, you need to minimize trauma. You don't want to pass horrible things along to lots of people, but you also need to let people opt out. The next thing is the other number one thing that really, really helps people is giving them autonomy over their own tasks. That can be incredibly difficult when you have a queue-based system. If people are just opting out, then you can't measure performance across time. Maybe you have to stay on top of a queue. You can never let it get more than 2 minutes over the limit or whatever. So if that's not possible, if you can't let people pick and choose between a variety of tasks, give people a little bit of flex time. And if you really have to schedule, give people paid flex time at the end of their day, so that they have a paid break of like 15 minutes before they clock out, where they can just like play a video game, chat with their coworkers, take a breath, and it's paid, so that they have that time to reset in whatever way makes sense for them before they go home for the day. Because that transition between work and home, especially if you have people working remotely, can be really, really difficult. And so if you can't allow the flexibility in the middle of the day because your time is so rigid, give them that flexibility at the end of the day. And then the last thing, super, super quick, going back again to what Jeffrey said, the feedback loops. Listen to people, make sure you are listening to their insights, you're learning from them, you're reinforcing them, you're amplifying insights from the frontline teams. I continuously learn things from frontline moderators. They know exactly what's happening on platforms. They are way smarter than people give them credit for a lot of the time. Such an under-tapped resource. So use that creativity and ask people, you know, again, like, what do you think will help? And they'll have really great ideas.
Love that. Yeah, I really love the idea of that paid break to transition, particularly in remote. I work remotely, and so the life and work often intertwine. And so being able to have that reset, and I think it just shows support as well from the organizations, like, hey, we understand the role that you have, and here we want to do this to help that transition easier. Sabine, so you helped create the Wellbeing and Resilience program at Keywords, and you talked a lot about sort of breaking down barriers, and we've talked a lot about that today already, for giving moderators the opportunity to say, hey, they're not okay. Can you give us maybe 1 or 2 examples of what you did or how you accomplished this, or something like that?
Gladly, Kaila, and let me start actually with 3 points that I focused, and then I'll give you specific examples for each point. So asking myself, how do superheroes open up? What do they need? The first one for me was create an environment where they feel safe to share. And that talks a little bit into what Alice mentioned before, the top to down, leading by example. And what I did, this is very specific. So for 1 year, because we have studios all over the world, just as a background info, I met for 1 year with HR on a monthly basis, and we simply talked about content moderators, making sure that they also understand the people that we employ, the work that they do. And also we did a gap analysis, so that no matter if you are joining in Europe, in Manila, or in Mexico, or in Canada, that every superhero gets the same support. Talked about different labor regulations and so on. I talked with the recruitment team to look at our onboarding, to look at moderation tests, talked to the language and development department. And so we actually created a specific trust and safety onboarding, not community management, not player support, specifically for trust and safety. It's an additional 2-day onboarding with 1 day committed to mental well-being. That's where we talk about stigma. That's where we talk about the perspective of mental health in different cultures, the importance to talk about it, the difference between mental health and mental illness. Often that differentiation isn't even there. And after that, I focused on leadership support. I wanted the buy-in of the leaders, and that's also one of our core pillar programs. Specific example here, I did well-being check-ins. First, we started every 2 weeks to see how are you talking with the team about well-being, what are you doing? Then we moved to once a month, and then we moved to every 6 weeks. So we still do that with every project leadership to talk about the well-being. Once we had that established, that's the second point, create daily routines that cultivate a well-being mindset. Repeat, 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 implement until it becomes a second nature. And for that, we created daily, weekly, and monthly activities that we repeat and that become routines, second natures. And that can be from flexibility of taking breaks, that can be end of day rituals. Just this week, I talked to a leader and said, what end of day rituals do you have? Or at the end of the week, and we talked about it, what could we implement? That looks different for each project, for each team, depending, do they work in an office? Do they work from home? Also the flexibility. So we have one, just to give a quick example, we have one studio that the superheroes have to work from the office. They use public transport. So it was very stressful for them to be there on time at the beginning of their shift. So what leadership did, it's fantastic, gave them that flex hour at the beginning of their shift. So if they're running half an hour late, it's okay, their shift is covered. So those are great examples, small but very powerful. And then last but not least, consider the differences in cultures. So for example, my team or the team in Mexico, when I meet with them, I know they will be willing to share, we will have conversations. I just need to listen, right? With the team from Japan, I use different tools. They prefer writing, so I can use a survey to get insights there into the support that they need. And so I will stop here, also for the sake of time, but consider the different cultures, how they talk, the stigma in those cultures, and help those superheroes also to open up and be patient. It may take a while. But if you lead, and that is actually the last point here, if you see, or if superheroes see that leadership lead by example, it's just a matter of time that they will follow that they will feel safe, and they will start opening up.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And when I think of the global context, and I'll use video game industry again, you know, when we're going through design and development, we think of global outcomes. We think of how things will be perceived in one part of the world versus another, and it needs to be carried through in moderation and in support and in well-being and resilience as well. How people interact differently, absolutely something important to consider. Okay, so we clearly have so much to talk about on this topic, and we are rapidly running out of time. So I'm going to switch it up for our panelists. Be prepared. The third topic was peer support and how it's underutilized. So I want one quick item from each of you. We'll go Alice, Jeffrey, Sabine on peer support is underutilized. What is something that we can do to bolster peer support? Alice, go.
Make it opt-in. Have peer support that's not wellness related, just fun activities, and really focused on what people are good at and what they enjoy. People have a ton of interests outside of work that often can also intersect with work. And so be curious about those and let them tell you what they want to do.
Love that. Doesn't just have to be the difficult aspect of our job that we're talking about, but how can we lighten it and have fun together? Love it. Jeffrey.
Yeah, Alice, you stole one of my key talking points, but she's
Sorry.
That's all right. She's spot on. This is what you want. You want consensus from your panel. So she's spot on, right? Lots of our work, even that predating what we've done with keywords, suggested that it's valued, but it's underutilized. You want empowering peer support. So that means it's opt-in. That means it's bounded. It means that it's trained and resourced. Doesn't it be trained to dealing with the bad stuff, like Alice said, but you want it, you don't want certain empathetic colleagues, for example, in an unstructured setting turning into everyone's counselor, for example, right? So it's a safe space that the company it's for you to select, and the company kind of properly resources it so that it can be created into what those people that are using it want it to be.
Fantastic. Absolutely. Thank you on that, Jeffrey. And Sabine, for yourself.
The advantage I have is I can just give you an example, and that is create different avenues and activities that enable and encourage our superheroes to interact. And what we actually did in our last Trust and Safety newsletter, that's a newsletter exclusively issued for our superheroes. One superhero had the idea, because the topic was cultural differences, cultural nuances, and they said, hey, all of our gamer superheroes, we attached a link to a list that you can put in the game that you play, your username. That means they can actually connect after work, they can do fun activities, and they can connect outside of work with something that they love doing. And so they're looking for those avenues to connect.
Fantastic. And I'll add one of my own, which I know from the work that we do with our teams, which is if you're up against a difficult problem, and I do this in my personal life as well, talk about it with the folks that are in a similar role to you. They probably have experienced something similar. They can offer insights. And if they can't offer a solution, they can at least support you because they've probably had the same very difficult task in front of them as well. Amazing, folks. Clearly, we need more time, and maybe we need a round 2 of this webinar to be able to really dive into so much fantastic information. We sort of talked about providing key takeaways. So in one more sort of rapid fire round, and then we'll open it up to questions, and we'll go Jeffrey, Sabine, Alice this time. If you could offer one piece of advice, one actionable items that studios could implement right now, today, to start or improve a well-being and resilience program in a very short fashion, what would that be?
Yeah, I've already got myself off mute. So there's a whole bunch, Kaila, but if I'm going to pick one, and knowing my colleagues on the panel, engineer problem-focused coping at the team level. So, I use TAME, again, target, adjust, measure, and embed. Have a weekly routine. It doesn't need to revolutionize the system. It just needs to become the mantra, and some thinking so that it's open and discussed.
Love that.
Sorry, I forgot that I'm second. Yes. So the well-being concept starts with hiring. Start with your hiring process.
Fantastic. Alice?
Be as flexible as you possibly can be, and creative where you can be. This role can be very inflexible generally, but managers and leaders, you have more room for creativity than you might think. So try to think outside the box a little bit and listen to your team. Again, they'll tell you what they need.
Wonderful. Tremendous thank you to all 3 of you, Jeffrey, Alice, and Sabine, for lending us your expertise and being willing to dive into such an important topic. We have a few minutes left. We have Sarah on the call with us that is helping us keep everything organized. Sarah, we probably have time for one question live to get us to the top of the hour. And then if some of our panelists are able to stick around, perhaps we can go longer. But would you like to, no pressure, choose a question for us to answer live?
Sure, and we had a lot of questions, so I don't think we're going to have time in the next 15 minutes, even if we stay over time, to answer them all. But let's try to get a few to go back to Sabine's point about the hiring being so important, one question was around how do you measure whether or not someone is built to be a moderator or not? And how do you recommend managing when someone discovers that this work is not for them?
So in our hiring practice, it goes back to conversation. Get to know the superhero or the candidate, that's the word I'm looking for, really well. And we do that in two parts. It is really important to educate, to be transparent about the role. What is it? I had people joining and after 3 weeks saying, oh, I wasn't aware that that's what entails. So be very clear about that. And then in the second part of the interview, after they were able to digest that information, we talk about their resiliency, how they deal with stress, how they would handle certain situations or use cases. And we also have a moderation test. We go over the results and basically screen them, so to say, or have more of that conversation, getting to know both sides, and then follow up on that after 3 weeks up until 3 months, and then you have a pretty good idea if they enjoy this role or not. But a huge a huge aspect is also the why. Why do you want to do this? And most of them want to contribute to a healthy space in the internet, which is great to see. So they are there for the right reasons.
Awesome, thank you. Anything else, Alice or Jeffrey, that you want to add?
Yeah, I'll add 2 things for after the fact. One, just repeating what I said before, give people alternate pathways if possible to other kinds of jobs if that doesn't work out. The other is that I've seen sometimes team leads and managers are incentivized for retention on their teams. They're given bonuses if they retain everybody on their team for trust and safety. This can actually be bad because you don't want to retain people where the job is unhealthy for them. You don't want to incentivize a manager to dismiss what somebody is saying. You want them to help the person leave in a way that is, good for them and helpful for them and good for their mental health. So look for those incentives for management and encourage people to look at it more broadly.
Awesome.
And really quick, kind of, echoing Alice's point, no incentives, and actually where possible, a rotation, pathways out into other roles. I mean, I appreciate not every organization can do it, but there are other organizations out there that do operate that model, and it seems to work very, very well. You do not want to prolong exposure to traumagenic content because the research suggests that it can and likely will, no matter what you have in place, lead to secondary traumatic stress and vicarious trauma, as it does in many other roles. But a really short other point, kind of echoing Sabine, is the importance of psychoeducation early on. I talk a lot about what I refer to as digital resilience inoculation. So Sabine talked about transparency about what the role involves. That's part of that, being completely transparent around what that's going to look like, but equally giving people the tools ahead of time to know that if things go wrong, they wake up in the middle of the night and their heart's racing a million miles an hour, there's nothing wrong with them. They are having a completely normal reaction to increased and frequent exposure to abnormal content. They're okay. It's not a problem with them. It's a problem with the field. Perhaps we could even go as far as saying it's a problem with society because it's all out there. But that helps destigmatize and normalize everything, which is a really useful individual coping mechanism to do some self-reflection.
Awesome. Thank you very much for sharing. So we're going to take a few more questions, but before some attendees are leaving us, I'm just going to do a quick share of that screen to showcase the upcoming webinar that we have actually next week. And I think Carrie has been joining us today. So hi, Carrie. We're looking forward to hearing your session as well. And also, I just received those new games, player engagement games, and we have trust and safety focused in that game as well. So we're going to be giving away some of those games in the next webinar. So if you're free to join us on the 18th, please do so. And I know Kaila is going to have to drop. She has a meeting, and Sabine as well. But Alice and Jeffrey are staying with us an extra 10-15 minutes. Thank you so much for doing that, to answer more of the questions, because we had so many. So thank you, Sabine. Thank you, Kaila. And I'll keep asking a few questions.
You bet. And
Thank
just
you.
once again,
It was
thank
a
you,
pleasure.
Jeffrey, Alice, and Sabine. And we will be also doing some follow-ups on LinkedIn as well. And we can also answer some of the questions there that are related to this topic. So thank you again, everyone who joined us. And thank you to the wonderful panelists. And Sarah, all that you do for behind the scenes.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
All right, so one of the questions that came through that actually was asked twice is, what are some of the basic steps that non-profitable groups can do, like smaller organization that person work with gaming communities, but a lot of these don't bring in revenue to pay for resources like other established company may be able to do?
It's a really good question. I'll start with a little bit of a plug, but it's not so much a plug, which is we completely understand that there's the big, the very big, the medium, small, and then every which what there is of organizational involvement in moderating content. And there is a lot of decent, free to use material all out there. Is it useful across every context and culture? Not necessarily at a universal level, but we're currently working on deploying something called MindPie, which kindly, Sabine and I have been talking a lot about. It's a free, easy to use online resource that provides a little bit of psychoeducation. It gives you an output of what essentially we think you might be struggling with, not clinically, but it might be demonstrating, are you having difficulties with your relationships? Are you having difficulties with your anxiety, with your sleeping? And then it takes you on a trajectory of really easy to use self-help activities and monitoring and self-reflection. It's not going to solve your problems if there are problems. It's not meant to replace clinical supervision if you were to be clinically distressed. But what it is meant to do is open up that dialogue, think a little bit about what you're experiencing, and then take some proactive steps. And we're just testing it out right now, but I'm very happy to put it to anybody who wants to get in touch. We're not looking for money for it. It's free to use. Yes, it's in English, but AI helps translate really easily nowadays. So little things like that, though. And what it does is it takes you through kind of breathing exercises and keeping a sleep diary. And yes, that all sounds like a little bit like sucking eggs, but actually, when you manifest that in a way in which this is in your repertoire of other things, it might be a useful anchor.
Sounds amazing. I'm excited. Excited to see it. I would add, if you're a really tiny team and you really have no resources, what you have is each other and the ability to have a very solid team dynamic. And so spend a lot of time on team building, again, creating a psychologically safe environment for people to come to you and talk. Good management practices, really good mental health insurance. If you're in a country that doesn't do that by default, so that people can get that clinical help and clinical supervision if they need it outside of the workplace. I would say in general, that's a really good thing to do. Sometimes people feel safer talking to folks at work because they know that they get it. Other people do not want to open up with anybody at work, and they really need to talk to a third party outside of their employer. And so giving that option is good. And then, using broader peer support, community support, see if you can connect with other groups or other organizations that are in a similar place, and just have places for people to feel less isolated and less alone, because that often is a big stressor when you have really, really small groups and organizations.
Thank you very much. To kind of like jump on that, in a bit of a tricky situation, I guess. One of the questions, someone really liked everything suggested. However, how would you deal with teams having a leader or manager that's a bit rigid or inflexible? Like, is there a way for someone from, instead of like top down, like how do you change the mindset?
I mean, I mean, and we've heard that before as well, and that can be challenging. My perception on that is this is where that peer support comes in, right? It's having that internal sense of community with your colleagues. Like Alice was saying earlier, it doesn't need to be about your well-being, but getting together and with your colleagues who share similar roles and coming up with your own policy between inverted commas or your own ask or your own wish kind of gives you strength in numbers. It gives you a voice. It demonstrates your own empowerment. I appreciate all of the organizational challenges with we might get sacked, we might lose our job, they're not listening, but it needs to start somewhere. And I guess having that camaraderie and that backup with your peers is a useful first step.
Awesome, thank you. There was another question. Sometimes people have trouble seeing that they're triggered or otherwise being affected by the content that they're viewing in the moment. Do you recommend a wellness program include education on identifying signals of activation or low mood?
Yeah, of course. I think that it can also be really counterintuitive sometimes. Waking up in the middle of the night with your heart racing, you could instantly say, okay, I'm really stressed out. But there are other indicators too, like low mood, you said. Sometimes just feeling numb to everything and like not excited about stuff anymore. And that is something that sometimes a loved one has to point out to you and you might not recognize in yourself. So I think definitely education on that, and then encouraging people to go through little, checklists or self-surveys, maybe the tool that Jeffrey was talking about, ways to just kind of see how you're feeling over time and think about it and reflect on it, can be really helpful. But those warning signs look really different to different people, and in different situations. And I'll also say, resilience in this kind of work is very, very tied to resilience and what is happening outside of work. We are living in an extremely stressful time in the world right now. There are all kinds of horrible things happening everywhere. We're inundated with bad news. It is a really stressful time to be alive. And when you're dealing with all of that outside of work and then also dealing with difficult things inside of work, it can be really hard to separate those things out, and they absolutely affect each other. And so even if somebody feels like they're coping with work okay, they're not necessarily getting triggered by individual things anymore, their resilience can erode over time, especially if they're personally affected by something happening in the outside world. So just to say, all of that is very connected as well.
Awesome, thank you. There was also a question, and we had to have a question, obviously, about AI. So what impact do you see AI having on trust and safety employees? And then someone else asked more around the evolution of moderators' roles, and how could it be used in company well-being program strategy? So there's a few questions around AI that were asked.
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's something, and we're hearing a lot about, the emotional dependency on AI apps. And even myself, I was in the doctor's the other day, and when he left the room, I noticed that he was using ChatGPT to do my diagnosis for me, which was I did not give consent for, but that's not what this is about. There's one angle to it in particular two angles, Sarah, that I think are important, and neither of them are going to be extremely informative, but useful for colleagues that are listening to take on board. The first is, and it links into something Alice said at the very beginning, humans need to stay in the loop of all of this. What I do not want to see happening is companies relying on AI solutions to get rid of the non-violative content so that moderator cues are then just violative content and extreme content all the time to meet the organizational KPIs. I'm not okay with that. That's not what AI should be used for. It should be used to minimize the exposure to traumagenic content when necessary, and to hopefully help with the cues, but not just to kind of be used to feed those cues with actually, positive flags every single time. And I'm concerned that that might be happening as we speak, although I am aware of some decent talk and policy that's trying to be developed. The second bit is a little bit of companion app / chatbot help for some grounding isn't necessarily the worst. I mean, it's not obviously clinically endorsed or anything like that. But if you're if you're really struggling and you are not coping, and it's a combination of everything Alice just said, based off of work, based off external circumstances, based off of home life, all of that stuff together, it's so much more important to speak to a trusted person, whether that's a friend or a professional, because that friend or professional, Alice used a really good example. You might think you're coping, but actually you need a family member, a friend to go, "Oi, what's wrong with you? You're being a jerk, or this is happening. You're being really cynical. You're obviously something's happening," right? Speak to a human so that actually you can have that critical feedback, and then depending upon where you're located, depending upon what benefits you have or do not have, you can hopefully find a path that might be assisting. But I would say do not rely on a chatbot, please, for your psychological well-being.
I totally agree. I'll go back to the first part. I work for an AI company that automates moderation, so we're having a lot of these conversations. One of the things that I think is often the hardest, and we talked about this a little bit, is this feeling of being disempowered as a moderator. You're making individual decisions over and over and over again, and those individual decisions are not ultimately changing anything within the system. And so the human capacity for insight, for strategic thinking, for being proactive is so important. And that's where humans should be working, is in this space where you make one decision and it helps to retrain the AI and sort of signal what should be automated behind you. So you're not just saying, my first job in tech was just over and over, yes, it's a romance scammer. Yes, it's a romance scammer. Yep, this is one too. Yep, this one is too. That was literally my job for 8 hours a day. And it was so frustrating because it was the same thing over and over. And so you can save money using AI systems. You can automate those really repetitive tasks, but that money then should be reinvested in the teams to allow them to slow down, to think, to document, to have conversations, to be more strategic, to spend more time on wellness, especially if, like Jeffrey said, the majority of what they're seeing is then the more difficult, more egregious content, even if it's not necessarily more graphic content, even if it's just more gray area, difficult content, that takes a much higher cognitive load and can really affect your teams. So what I agree, like what I don't want to see is moderation teams who are tasked with working at the exact same pace, but now their work is 10 times harder because the AI is only doing all the easy stuff. That's not good for anybody.
Thank you. I think we might have time for one last, but it's going to have to be quick because we've got 2 minutes. Someone asked, how can we shine an industry light on best practice apart from today's webinar, of course?
I mean, I'll be really quick. I went to TrustCon this year, got to see Alice there, which was really good. And I led a roundtable on well-being as an industry standard in the trust and safety space. Watch this space. It's trying to get to a point where we harmonize a bit and make consistency. I know that's nearly impossible, but we're looking at creating a working document around best practice and recommendations. And I'm very happy to circulate that once it's ready, and it will be published. And, it's not going to solve everything, but it's going to give some good guidelines, I hope.
Yeah, That's what we need. We need a bunch of companies to co-sign onto the same standards, agree what good looks like so that nobody's reinventing the wheel individually. And especially to go back to what we were talking about, smaller organizations that don't have research budgets are left guessing, what does good look like? Are we actually doing things that are good? We think we are, but we're not sure. That's where studies like the one that Jeffrey did come in and are really helpful. But then we all have to come together and say, okay, what is the actionable checklist that now every company should be doing to learn from this? And if there's peer pressure, if everybody signs on to the same kind of thing, it'll become standard. So that's what we need, is more standardization, even though we also need more flexibility for moderators. We need both. We need like a floor that is good and then flexibility on top of that.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you very much for your time, for all the insights. I kept on seeing comments from all the attendees saying that it was very, very useful. So we'll be sharing the recording and we'll be doing some wrap-ups and share more of those video from today's session on social media. So let's stay connected to build more best practices and help moderators around the world. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for staying.
Thanks. It was a pleasure.
Bye.